I think it would still have been beneficial to stay a little longer, to let Iraqi politics solidify and stabilize further, to have the wounds of warfare heal a little more. It was only about 3 years ago that things were so unsettled. And that's why I would have liked to see us stay.
This is At Brookings, a weekly in-depth look at issues behind the news. This week, after Iraq, what's next for U.S. forces?
As Iraq's problems with extremism, a largely ineffective government, and sectarian violence continue, President Obama has promised to remove all U.S. soldiers from the country in a matter of weeks. Is this a good move for American forces, for Iraq, for the region? It's not ideal, but it's not the worst that could happen either, says senior fellow Michael O'Hanlon.
Obama did double the length of time to stay in Iraq that he said he would on the campaign trail. He said he was going to be out within, depending on how you looked at his speeches, 12 to 16 months. He's now going to stay for 35 months from his inauguration till the end of this year with some level of American troops. So that was the crucial period. I was a big critic of candidate Obama for his rush to get out of Iraq, but I have to give him some credit that once he became president, he slowed down, he listened to his commanders, he was practical, and I think he deserves, credit for that. And the 35 months he gave the Iraqis means that they're 35 more months into building a democracy, which should give them a better chance of holding it together. Now, I would have preferred to keep several thousand troops, up to 20,000 anyway, because the Iraqis are not in a place where everything is healed and stabilized from their conflicts. They still have a lot of sectarian tension. They still have challenges from Iran. They have other issues. And I think we could have played a useful, calming, reassuring, advisory role. It's too bad we can't. But it doesn't mean it's the end of the world, and it doesn't mean it's primarily Obama's fault.
Well, Michael, what then becomes of these troops? At one time, the troop level in Iraq was well over 100,000. And there's talk now that some of these troops will be deployed to Kuwait. How do you feel about that?
There are discussions, it's true, with the Kuwaiti government, from what I understand, on whether some of them should stay there. I'll be honest, I actually doubt that our numbers in Kuwait will go up at all, because we've had a lot of forces in Kuwait throughout the last decade, largely to support the mission in Iraq. It's been primarily a logistics hub, and it may now change in character, because if you don't have those forces in Iraq any longer, you don't need all the logistics support from Kuwait. So what you may see in Kuwait is the overall U.S. numbers come down a little. The number of logisticians comes down a lot, but we add a combat unit or two. But frankly, this doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because the idea here is not to be ready to resume our involvement in another Iraqi war. I don't think many Americans have any interest in that. I don't think President Obama has any interest in that. The idea here should be to prevent that resumption of conflict in the first place. So you want to be on the ground working with the people who are at risk of not getting along with each other. Being in Kuwait doesn't accomplish the mission.
Well, what about Iran? Is there any need whatsoever to keep a U.S. military presence in the region because Iran might get aggressive or because it might be building up its nuclear capabilities?
Iran's not our next target unless President Obama or President Romney or whomever authorizes a strike against their nuclear facilities. That's pretty unlikely. We need to depend a little bit on Iraqi nationalism, an Iraqi, sense of pride, and also sophistication and intelligence about what Iran is up to inside their country. This is not a situation where we have to do all the containing of Iran. Iraq has proven over the years that it's pretty wary of its neighbor to the east and pretty capable of keeping an eye out too. Now, I'm not suggesting all is well. I think Iran does try to cause mayhem. They've killed a lot of Americans indirectly by supplying weaponry to certain factions in Iraq over the years, and they've killed a lot of Iraqis, sometimes through assassination, sometimes targeting the very politicians that may choose to challenge them. So it is dangerous for Iraqis. But every time Iran targets another Iraqi, Iraqis realize it. And so you may lose a good leader, and you may have a little bit of a so-called Finlandization effect. But for the most part, the Iraqis get even more angry and even more adamant that they're not going to be Iran's stooge. And I think that's a dynamic that works to our advantage.
Well, how are the Iraqi people taking this? Are they concerned about the pullout?
I think Iraqis are nervous, about their future, about each other. They've never become pro-American the way some of the countries that we occupied after World War II, for example, became pro-American. And I think that's one of the reasons why President Obama may have said to the Iraqis, listen, you just got to offer us a decent deal on legal immunity or we're not going to stay. We're not going to finesse this forever. At some point, you've got to want us. And I think, that's a somewhat reasonable argument. And the Iraqi population needs to understand that, we Americans at some point do get tired of being expected to help at the same time that we're hated. And you can't have it both ways forever. Now, I'm not suggesting all Iraqis hate us, but our popularity has never recovered there as much as one might have hoped. A lot of politicians are nervous. They're worried about how the factionalism could intensify. They feel the place is still unsettled. They would like us to remain, even though they often badmouth us in public. And I think it would have been better if they had gotten their way. But unfortunately, they did not deliver. They did not offer a deal for our staying that was adequate to make it possible.
And how do other countries in the region feel about this move, Michael, specifically those nations in the Gulf Cooperation Council?
I think the Gulf Cooperation Council has always had mixed views about Iraq under a new government, a Shia majority government in a Shia majority country. Certainly the Saudis have been extremely wary as the citadel of Sunni Islam. And then I think some other countries along the Gulf, the smaller countries, which with the exception of Bahrain are all Sunni majority, have also some wariness about Iraq. And they don't necessarily worry that much about Iraq as the bellwether for them. They probably do worry a little about Iranian infiltration and influence because they have their issues with Iran. And they're going to be nervous at any change because any change creates question marks. Who's going to benefit? So I think there's probably a certain general level of feeling a little unsettled and nervous. But I think it's primarily just because things are changing. And, we're going to stay at some level in Kuwait. We're going to stay at some level in Bahrain, Qatar, Saudi, with advisors in Saudi, but, operational forces elsewhere. We're going to have a lot of capability. And to the extent they feel a little nervous about Iran, it's not all bad for us because it tends to solidify our partnerships with them.
Stay up to date with the latest research, learn about Brookings events, and search our directory of experts, all from your mobile device. To download Brookings for your BlackBerry, Android, iPhone, or iPad, go to brookings.edu/mobile.